The day Captain Marcus Rivera became the most hated man in Millbrook Heights was the same day he saved a child's life and exposed the rot at the heart of their picture-perfect community. Station 19 sits like an unwelcome guest at the edge of Millbrook Heights, a red brick reminder that even the wealthiest neighborhoods can't buy immunity from life's emergencies. Captain Marcus Rivera has watched this community transform over his 15-year career from a working-class enclave, where his father and grandfather once served, into a playground for tech executives and hedge fund managers who measure everything by property values and quarterly earnings. The irony isn't lost on Marcus that the same people who demand premium emergency services also complain loudest about the inconvenience those services create. Just last week, Richard Blackwood, CEO of Synapse Technologies, filed a formal complaint because Engine 19's air horn interrupted his video conference with investors in Singapore. The week before, Diane Blackwood led a delegation to the city council demanding firefighters park their unsightly vehicles at least 2 blocks away during medical emergencies to preserve the neighborhood's aesthetic appeal. Marcus remembers when the Millbrook Heights residents used to bring homemade cookies to the station during holidays. Now, they send lawyers with noise ordinances and HOA violations. The community that once celebrated their local heroes now treats them like necessary evils to be managed and controlled. The transformation accelerated after the Blackwoods moved in 5 years ago and established the Millbrook Community Standards Committee. What started as a neighborhood beautification group evolved into something resembling a shadow government, with tentacles reaching into every aspect of community life. They've successfully lobbied for restrictions on emergency vehicle sirens during quiet hours, demanded advance notice for all non-emergency inspections, and even proposed a fee structure where the fire department would reimburse residents for property disruption caused by emergency responses. Marcus's crew reflects the changing dynamics perfectly. Lieutenant Sarah Chun, a 10-year veteran, grew up in Millbrook Heights when it was still affordable for middle-class families. She's watched childhood friends get priced out while newcomers complain about the fire station, lowering their property values. Rookie Jake Thompson, fresh from the academy, initially admired the neighborhood's pristine appearance until he experienced the residents' entitled attitudes firsthand. Engineer Bobby Martinez, a union representative, has documented dozens of incidents where wealthy residents have interfered with emergency operations, demanding firefighters work around their schedules and social events. The breaking point came during last month's 4th of July barbecue at the Blackwood estate. 3 blocks away, elderly Mr. Patterson suffered a heart attack in his garden. When the ambulance and Engine 19 responded with sirens blazing, Richard Blackwood actually approached Marcus mid-emergency, demanding they turn off that racket because it was disrupting his guests' wine tasting. The audacity was breathtaking. A man literally dying 300 yards away, and Blackwood was worried about his party's ambience. That incident sparked the formation of what Diane Blackwood grandly called the Emergency Services Coordination Protocol, a Byzantine system requiring advance approval for certain types of responses. The protocol included provisions for community notification before any major emergency operations, noise mitigation strategies during responses, and mandatory post-incident consultation with affected property owners. It was bureaucracy disguised as public safety, designed to give wealthy residents veto power over emergency services. Marcus has seen this pattern before in other affluent communities, the gradual erosion of public service autonomy under the guise of community standards and quality of life improvements. What makes Millbrook Heights different is the systematic nature of the assault. The Blackwoods and their committee don't just complain, they organize, lobby, and leverage their political connections to create official policies that prioritize comfort over safety. The fire station's relationship with the community reached a new low when the committee proposed relocating Station 19 entirely, arguing that a more centralized location would better serve the broader metropolitan area while removing an industrial eyesore from a neighborhood. Never mind that response times would increase dramatically for Millbrook Heights residents. The committee's real estate development arm, coincidentally, had identified the station's valuable corner lot as perfect for luxury condominiums. Marcus often thinks about his grandfather, Captain Miguel Rivera, who served this same community for 35 years. Miguel used to tell stories about residents who treated firefighters like family, who understood that emergency services were the thin line between civilization and chaos. That Millbrook Heights died sometime in the last decade, replaced by a gated community mentality that views public servants as hired help rather than protectors. The irony will become crystal clear in about 20 minutes, when Marcus and his crew race through these same pristine streets, past these same beautiful homes, desperately trying to save a child's life while the community's own residents actively work against them. The people who demand perfection from their emergency services will reveal their true character when faced with a choice between their principles and a child's survival. The alarm bells are about to sound at Station 19, calling Marcus and his crew to respond to what should be a routine house fire. What they don't know yet is that their path to that fire will be blocked not by accident or weather, but by the very people they've sworn to protect. The community that has spent years making their jobs harder is about to discover exactly what happens when you treat your protectors as enemies. In Millbrook Heights, where image matters more than substance and property values trump human decency, Captain Marcus Rivera is about to learn that sometimes being a hero means becoming the villain in someone else's story. The alarm is ringing now, and there's a child who needs saving. Emma Walsh clutches her megaphone with trembling hands, her environmental science textbooks forgotten in her dorm room as she stands at the center of what she believes will be her generation's defining moment. At 21, she's convinced that blocking Millbrook Heights' main arterial road is the only way to stop the Meridian Development Corporation from destroying the last remaining wetlands in the county. What she doesn't understand, yet, is that good intentions can have deadly consequences. The Future Earth Coalition protest began at dawn with 12 committed activists. By 10 a.m., social media had amplified their message, drawing nearly 300 supporters to the intersection of Millbrook Avenue and Heritage Drive. The location wasn't chosen randomly. It's the primary access point to the controversial Meridian Development site, but it also happens to be the main emergency response corridor for the entire Millbrook Heights district. David Sterling, Emma's boyfriend and co-organizer, spent weeks planning this moment. A political science major with dreams of following in Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's footsteps, he sees environmental activism as his pathway to political relevance. He's studied every successful protest movement, from Selma to Standing Rock, and believes that strategic disruption is the only language that power understands. The fact that their blockade might impact emergency services hasn't seriously entered his calculations. The third member of their leadership triumvirate is Patricia Mills, a 58-year-old veteran activist whose gray hair and weathered face tell the story of 4 decades fighting the system. Patricia remembers when environmental protests actually changed policies, when civil disobedience meant something beyond viral hashtags and Instagram posts. She's suspicious of these college kids and their social media strategies, but she recognizes their passion and energy. What worries her is their naivety about the forces they're opposing. The protesters have created an impressive display of organization and commitment. Chains of activists link arms across the 4-lane intersection, while others have positioned wooden barriers and even chained themselves to concrete-filled drums. Signs reading, "Save Our Wetlands," and "Climate Action Now" flutter in the morning breeze. The demonstration has the festive atmosphere of a street fair, complete with donated coffee, homemade snacks, and acoustic guitars providing soundtrack. Marcus receives the first call about the road closure at 8:15 a.m. from Officer Rodriguez, who's working crowd control at the protest perimeter. "Captain, we've got a situation developing on Millbrook Avenue," Rodriguez reports, his voice carrying the weariness of someone who's dealt with too many protests lately. Complete blockade of the intersection. Protesters say they're not moving until the city council emergency session tonight. Marcus immediately recognizes the implications. Millbrook Avenue isn't just another road. It's the primary emergency access route to a community of 15,000 residents. The alternate routes through Millbrook Heights' winding residential streets could add 10 to 15 minutes to response times, potentially meaning the difference between life and death in critical situations. He attempts to reach protest organizers through official channels, calling the Future Earth Coalition's listed contact number and leaving detailed voicemails explaining the emergency access concerns. When that fails, he tries social media, posting professional messages on the protest's Facebook page and Twitter account. His requests are simple and reasonable. Maintain a corridor for emergency vehicles while continuing the demonstration. The protesters' response reveals the fundamental disconnect between their idealistic worldview and practical reality. Emma Walsh, responding to Marcus's Facebook post, writes, "Emergency services are just another tool of the establishment to break up legitimate protests. We won't be intimidated by scare tactics. Our planet is dying, and that's the real emergency." David Sterling goes further, posting a video on TikTok that characterizes any attempt to open emergency corridors as fascist intimidation designed to crush our First Amendment rights. His followers share and amplify the message, creating an echo chamber where compromise becomes betrayal and flexibility means weakness. Meanwhile, Millbrook Heights residents are growing increasingly agitated. Richard Blackwood arrives at the protest perimeter at 11 a.m. in his Tesla Model S, expecting to simply drive through the blockade to reach his office. When informed that the road is completely closed, his reaction is swift and predictable, demands for immediate police action to clear the protesters by force. "This is completely unacceptable," Blackwood announces to anyone within earshot, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to having problems solved immediately. "These people have no right to hold our community hostage. I pay more in property taxes than most of them make in a year, and I demand access to public roads." Diane Blackwood arrives shortly after with several other Community Standards Committee members. Initially, they support clearing the roads for emergency access, but their conversation quickly turns to broader complaints about outside agitators disrupting their neighborhood. The committee members begin discussing how this protest validates their arguments for increased community control over public spaces. As the morning progresses, the situation becomes increasingly volatile. Frustrated commuters honk horns and shout at protesters. The protesters, interpreting this anger as validation of their message's power, become more entrenched in their positions. Police officers, understaffed and dealing with multiple related incidents throughout the city, can only maintain crowd control rather than actively clearing the roadway. By noon, what began as an environmental protest has evolved into a complex standoff involving multiple competing interests: activists fighting for their cause, residents demanding access to their community, and emergency services personnel trying to maintain public safety. Everyone believes they're fighting for something important, and everyone is partially right. The stage is set for conflict, with Marcus caught in the middle between duty and bureaucracy, between activists who see emergency services as tools of oppression and residents who view protesters as criminals. In 2 hours and 47 minutes, the alarm bells will ring at Station 19, and all these competing principles will collide with the ultimate reality: a child's life hanging in the balance. At exactly 2:47 p.m., the piercing wail of the alarm cuts through the relative calm of Station 19, instantly transforming the firehouse from a place of routine maintenance and paperwork into a coordinated machine of emergency response. The computerized dispatch voice crackles over the intercom with clinical precision. Engine 19, Ladder 7, structure fire with entrapment, 1247, Elm Street, Cross Street Heritage Drive. Child reported trapped on second floor. Marcus feels the familiar surge of adrenaline as his crew springs into action with practiced efficiency. Jake Thompson slides down the pole from the second floor, his rookie enthusiasm tempered by growing experience. Lieutenant Sarah Chun is already pulling on her gear, her movements economical and purposeful. Engineer Bobby Martinez fires up Engine 19's massive diesel engine, the rumble echoing through the station as garage doors roll open with mechanical precision. The address means something to Marcus. 1247 Elm Street is a modest 2-story colonial home in the older section of Millbrook Heights, built in the 1960s when the neighborhood was still affordable for working families. It's the home of Lisa Chun, a single mother who works as a registered nurse at St. Mary's Hospital. No relation to Lieutenant Sarah Chun, despite the shared surname. A coincidence that's caused confusion at previous community events. As Engine 19 and Ladder 7 pull out of the station, dispatch updates crackle over the radio with increasing urgency. Lisa Chun is at work, pulling a double shift in the hospital's COVID recovery ward. Her 8-year-old son Tommy is home sick from school with a mild fever, being watched by Mrs. Rodriguez, a retired teacher who babysits several neighborhood children. The initial 911 call came from Mrs. Rodriguez herself, her panicked voice barely coherent as she reported that she'd managed to escape the house, but couldn't reach Tommy, who was trapped in his upstairs bedroom. The normal response time to 1247 Elm Street should be 4 minutes and 30 seconds. Marcus knows because he's driven these routes hundreds of times, timing every possible path through Millbrook Heights for exactly these situations. Every veteran firefighter carries a mental map of their district, knowing which streets flood in heavy rain, which intersections get clogged during rush hour, which routes provide the fastest access to every address in their coverage area. As they approach the main intersection of Millbrook Avenue and Heritage Drive, the scope of the protest blockade becomes immediately apparent. What looked like a manageable demonstration from aerial news footage reveals itself as a completely impenetrable barrier of human bodies, linked arms, and physical obstacles. Hundreds of protesters have created multiple layers of obstruction, with the most committed activists chained to concrete barriers in the innermost ring. Marcus keys his radio, maintaining the professional calm that's been drilled into him through 15 years of emergency response. Dispatch, Engine 19 approaching Millbrook and Heritage intersection. Road completely blocked by demonstrators. Unable to proceed on primary route. Requesting immediate police assistance for emergency corridor. The dispatcher's response carries bad news. Engine 19, be advised that police resources are currently deployed to multiple protest-related incidents throughout the city. No units immediately available for crowd control. Recommend alternate routing via Sycamore and Oak Streets. Bobby Martinez, monitoring radio traffic while navigating, shakes his head grimly. Captain, Sycamore route's going to add at least 8 minutes. Maybe more if we hit traffic on Oak Street. That puts us over 12 minutes total response time. 12 minutes. In structure fire situations involving trapped victims, every minute exponentially increases the danger. Smoke inhalation can cause unconsciousness within 5 to 10 minutes, depending on the victim's age and health. An 8-year-old child has even less tolerance for toxic smoke and reduced oxygen levels. Marcus makes the decision to attempt direct contact with protest leadership. He orders Bobby to position Engine 19 directly in front of the protesters' main barricade. Emergency lights flashing, air horn sounding the traditional firefighter signal pattern. The massive red truck, with its chrome fixtures and emergency services insignia, creates an imposing presence that momentarily quiets the chanting crowd. Stepping down from the engine's cab, Marcus approaches the protesters with his hands visible and his tone professionally neutral. His turnout gear, the heavy protective clothing that firefighters wear to emergency scenes, marks him unmistakably as emergency personnel rather than law enforcement. I'm Captain Rivera from Station 19, he announces, his voice carrying over the crowd without shouting. We have a confirmed structure fire with a child trapped approximately 1 mile from this location. I'm requesting immediate passage for emergency vehicles to reach the scene. Emma Walsh, recognizing an authority figure but not immediately understanding the distinction between firefighters and police, steps forward with her megaphone. Her response reveals the fundamental disconnect between activist theory and emergency reality. We will not be intimidated by establishment tactics designed to break up our legitimate protest. Environmental destruction is killing children every day, and we won't be moved by emotional manipulation. David Sterling joins her, his political science education providing him with talking points about civil disobedience and constitutional rights, but offering no framework for weighing those principles against immediate human need. This is exactly what we expected, he declares to the assembled protesters and growing media presence. They're using scare tactics to suppress our First Amendment rights. Patricia Mills, the veteran activist, feels a flicker of doubt as she observes Marcus's professional demeanor and the obvious urgency in his crew's body language. She's been through enough real emergencies in her 4 decades of activism to recognize when someone is genuinely desperate rather than merely manipulative. But she's also committed to maintaining solidarity with the younger activists who look to her for leadership. The standoff crystallizes with mathematical precision. Hundreds of protesters convinced they're fighting for planetary survival, facing a fire captain who knows that every passing minute reduces an 8-year-old boy's chances of survival. Radio updates from other units using alternate routes confirm the worst-case scenario. The backup route through residential streets is clogged with confused traffic as drivers try to navigate around the protest. Meanwhile, additional radio traffic paints an increasingly dire picture at 1247 Elm Street. Engine 23 on scene via Oak Street route, reports Captain Williams from the Eastern Station. Heavy smoke showing from second-floor windows. Unable to locate victim. Requesting ladder company for search and rescue operations. Ladder 7, with its specialized rescue equipment and trained search personnel, remains trapped behind the same protest blockade as Engine 19. The protesters have unknowingly created a perfect storm, blocking not just the fastest route to the emergency, but specifically preventing the arrival of the equipment and personnel most qualified to save Tommy Chen's life. Marcus looks at his watch, 2:51 p.m. For minutes since the alarm sounded, and they haven't moved a single block toward the emergency. In a normal response, they would already be on scene, beginning rescue operations. Instead, they're trapped in a philosophical debate while a child slowly suffocates in smoke-filled darkness. As precious seconds tick into minutes, Marcus finds himself trapped in a bureaucratic nightmare that would be comical if a child's life weren't hanging in the balance. Department protocols, designed to prevent impulsive decisions during high-stress situations, now work against him like chains around his crew's ability to respond effectively. Standard operating procedure requires Marcus to follow established channels when encountering civilian interference with emergency operations. First, request police assistance for crowd control. Second, contact Incident Command to coordinate alternative routing. Third, document the obstruction for potential legal action. The protocol assumes a rational world where public safety takes precedence over political statements, where adults understand that emergency services serve everyone regardless of their personal agendas. Marcus keys his radio with growing frustration. Dispatch, Engine 19, requesting immediate police assistance at Millbrook and Heritage for emergency corridor through protest blockade. We have confirmed entrapment with critical time factors. The response crackles back with bureaucratic precision. Engine 19, all available units are currently deployed to protest-related incidents throughout the metropolitan area. Estimated time for crowd control assistance is 45 minutes to 1 hour. Continue with alternate routing procedures. 45 minutes. Tommy Chan will be dead in 45 minutes if he isn't already unconscious from smoke inhalation. Marcus has seen enough structure fires to know that children succumb faster than adults. Their smaller lung capacity and higher metabolic rate make them vulnerable to carbon monoxide poisoning within minutes rather than hours. Lieutenant Sarah Chun, monitoring radio traffic from multiple agencies, provides a grim update. Captain, it's not just us. The protest has triggered secondary disruptions throughout the city. 2 other fire companies are dealing with blocked routes. Ambulance services are requesting extended response times, and police are stretched thin managing multiple demonstration sites. The situation becomes more complex as different factions within the protest movement begin revealing themselves. A group of older activists, led by Patricia Mills, approaches the fire trucks with what appears to be a willingness to negotiate. Patricia's weathered face shows the strain of someone caught between ideology and conscience. "Captain Rivera," she calls out, her voice carrying the authority of someone who's been through countless confrontations with authority figures. "We understand you have a job to do, but you have to understand what we're fighting for here. This development will destroy irreplaceable wetlands that serve as carbon sinks and wildlife habitat. We can't just step aside every time the establishment waves an emergency flag. Marcus responds with professional restraint, though his internal frustration is reaching a boiling point. Ma'am, I respect your cause, but there's an 8-year-old boy trapped in a burning house right now. This isn't about politics or development. This is about a child who might die if we can't reach him in time. Patricia's response reveals the fundamental disconnect between activist thinking and emergency reality. Captain, children are dying every day because of climate change. The floods, the heat waves, the air pollution. Environmental destruction kills thousands of children annually. We can't abandon our principles for one individual case, no matter how tragic. The cold calculation in her voice shocks even some of her fellow protesters. Emma Walsh, overhearing the conversation, begins to waver as the human reality of the situation penetrates her ideological certainty. David Sterling, however, doubles down on the group's position, pulling Emma aside for an urgent whispered conversation about maintaining solidarity and not falling for emotional manipulation tactics. Meanwhile, the Millbrook Heights residents have begun arriving in force, led by Richard Blackwood and his Community Standards Committee. Their initial support for clearing the roads quickly reveals its conditional nature when they learn the specific address of the emergency. 1247 Elm Street, Diane Blackwood repeats, consulting her smartphone. That's the Chun property, the one with the code violations we've been tracking. She exchanges meaningful glances with other committee members, and Marcus realizes with growing horror that their enthusiasm for emergency access is cooling rapidly. Richard Blackwood approaches Marcus with the practiced smoothness of a corporate executive delivering bad news to shareholders. Captain Rivera, perhaps we should consider the broader implications here. The Chun property has been a source of ongoing community concerns, property maintenance issues, noise complaint from the boys' friends playing in the yard. Maybe this is an opportunity to address multiple problems simultaneously. The implication hangs in the air like smoke from the very fire they're trying to reach. Marcus stares at Blackwood, unable to initially process the callousness of suggesting that an 8-year-old's potential death might solve neighborhood nuisance complaints. Sir, Marcus responds, his professional control beginning to crack. Are you suggesting that we should let a child die because his family doesn't meet your community standards? Blackwood backpedals quickly, recognizing that his statement sounds monstrous when spoken aloud. Of course not, Captain. I'm simply saying that perhaps the protesters have a point about not disrupting their demonstration for every minor emergency. Surely your alternate routes are sufficient for a routine house fire. The word routine ignites something in Marcus that 15 years of professional training struggles to contain. There is nothing routine about a trapped child. There is nothing minor about a structure fire with confirmed entrapment. The casual dismissal of Tommy Chen's life reveals the true character of the people Marcus has spent his career protecting. Bobby Martinez, monitoring the engine's radio, provides another devastating update. Captain, Engine 23 reports heavy smoke conditions throughout the structure. They've established exterior water supply, but can't initiate interior search without ladder company support for ventilation and secondary egress. That ladder company, Ladder 7, sits 30 feet away from Marcus, its crew ready and equipped to save Tommy's life, blocked by protesters who think they're saving the planet and residents who think they're protecting property values. The situation escalates when several younger protesters, inspired by David Sterling's rhetoric about standing firm against authority, begin actively reinforcing the barricades. They produce additional chains, zip ties, and even concrete anchors, making the blockade more permanent and more difficult to dismantle quickly. Emma Walsh watches this escalation with growing unease. Her environmental science background includes courses on emergency management and public health. She understands fire behavior, smoke inhalation, and the physiological effects of carbon monoxide poisoning better than most of her fellow activists. The academic knowledge she's studying in classroom settings is now playing out in real time, and the theoretical becomes terrifyingly concrete. Marcus makes a command decision that will define the rest of his career. He orders Jake Thompson to begin documenting everything with the engine's dashboard camera. Every conversation, every refusal to cooperate, every moment of delay that could cost Tommy Chin his life. If this situation goes badly, there will be investigations, lawsuits, and congressional hearings. Marcus wants an unfiltered record of exactly who said what when a child's life was on the line. The clock on Engine 19's dashboard reads 2:53 p.m. 6 minutes since the alarm sounded, and they haven't moved an inch toward 1247 Elm Street. The moment Marcus abandons diplomatic protocol marks a fundamental shift in his 15-year career from public servant to desperate father figure fighting for a child's life. With Tommy Chin's survival hanging by threads of time and oxygen, Marcus steps fully into the role of moral authority that his badge and experience have earned him. "Listen to me very carefully," Marcus announces, his voice cutting through the crowd's chatter with the authority of someone who has pulled children from burning buildings and held dying strangers in his arms. "My name is Captain Marcus Rivera. I have been a firefighter in this community for 15 years. I have saved lives, protected property, and served every one of you without question or judgment. Today, an 8-year-old boy named Tommy Chun is trapped in a burning house exactly 1 mile from where we stand." The crowd's attention shifts perceptibly as Marcus speaks. Unlike the political rhetoric they've been hearing all day, his words carry the weight of immediate, tangible reality. Several protesters in the outer rings begin looking uncomfortable, perhaps realizing for the first time that their demonstration might have consequences beyond making a political statement. Tommy Chun is 8 years old. Marcus continues, his voice rising with controlled passion. He likes baseball cards, rides his bicycle to the park every weekend, and helps his mother carry groceries because his father died in a car accident 2 years ago. Right now, he is unconscious or dying in a room filling with toxic smoke because you have decided that your political statement is more important than his life. Emma Walsh feels something crack inside her chest as Marcus speaks. Her environmental science courses covered the human cost of climate change in abstract terms. Statistical models showing increased mortality rates, displaced populations, agricultural disruption. But this is the first time she's faced the immediate, concrete reality of her actions causing direct harm to a specific named child. David Sterling, recognizing the emotional impact of Marcus's words on the crowd, steps forward with his megaphone to counter the narrative. "Don't be manipulated by establishment fear tactics," he shouts, his political science training providing him with talking points about maintaining solidarity. This is exactly how they break down every social movement, by creating artificial emergencies to divide our coalition. The response reveals Sterling's fundamental disconnect from reality. This isn't an artificial emergency manufactured to break up their protest. This is an 8-year-old boy suffocating in smoke while adults debate political theory. Patricia Mills, the veteran activist, finds herself caught between her lifetime of fighting authority figures and her growing recognition that this situation has moved beyond politics into pure human need. She's been through enough real emergencies during her 4 decades of activism to recognize desperation when she sees it, and Marcus Rivera is genuinely desperate. "How do we know this isn't just a setup?" Patricia calls out, her question carrying more doubt than conviction. "How do we know there's really a trapped child, and this isn't just a convenient excuse to break up our demonstration?" Marcus's response cuts through the morning air like a blade. "Because I'm looking at you right now and telling you that a child is dying. Because my radio is broadcasting real-time updates from the scene where my colleagues are trying to reach him. Because if you want to bet a little boy's life on your cynicism about authority figures, that makes you a monster." The word monster hangs in the air, forcing every protester to confront the moral reality of their position. Are they environmental activists fighting for the planet's future, or are they obstacles preventing the rescue of a child? The two identities suddenly seem mutually exclusive. Several protesters in the outer rings begin physically moving away from the barricades. A middle-aged woman named Jennifer Park, who joined the protest after dropping her own children at school, starts unlinking arms with the activists beside her. "If there's really a child trapped, we have to let them through," she says, her voice shaking. But the core leadership group, chained to concrete barriers in the intersection center, can't move even if they wanted to. David Sterling uses this physical reality to maintain psychological control. We can't abandon our principles at the first sign of pressure. Environmental destruction kills children every day. We can't save the planet if we give up every time someone waves an emergency flag. The arrival of local news crews adds another layer of complexity to the confrontation. Channel 7's helicopter provides aerial footage of the standoff, while reporters on the ground begin interviewing both protesters and Marcus. The presence of cameras forces everyone to consider how their actions will appear to viewers who aren't caught up in the immediate emotion of the moment. Marcus realizes that media attention could work in his favor. Speaking directly to the Channel 7 camera, he provides a clear, factual summary. At 2:47 p.m., we received a call about a structure fire with a child trapped at 1247 Elm Street. Our normal response time is 4 minutes. We have now been blocked from reaching this emergency for over 8 minutes by protesters who refuse to allow emergency vehicle passage. The live television coverage creates its own momentum. Viewers throughout the metropolitan area begin calling the station, demanding to know why protesters are blocking firefighters from reaching a trapped child. Social media explodes with competing hashtags. Hashtag Let Them Through begins trending alongside hashtag Stand Your Ground, creating a digital battleground that mirrors the physical confrontation in the intersection. Emma Walsh pulls out her phone and sees the growing online firestorm. Her own social media followers, who supported the protest an hour ago, are now posting angry messages about prioritizing a child's life over political statements. The coalition she spent weeks building is fracturing in real time as the human cost of their action becomes undeniable. The moment of truth arrives when Marcus makes a direct, personal appeal to Emma as the protest's visible leader. Emma Walsh, you started this demonstration because you believe in protecting life on this planet. I'm asking you to protect one specific life right now. Help me save Tommy Chun. Emma looks around at her fellow protesters, at the news cameras, at the growing crowd of angry residents, and at Marcus Rivera's desperate face. Every environmental science course she's ever taken emphasized the importance of considering human impacts alongside ecological concerns. The abstract theories are now colliding with immediate reality, and she must choose between ideological purity and human compassion. The clock on Marcus's radio display shows 2:55 p.m., 8 minutes since the alarm sounded, and Tommy Chun is running out of time in a room filling with toxic smoke while adults debate philosophy in the street. Marcus makes the agonizing decision to split his resources, a tactical choice that violates every principle of emergency response but represents the only viable option in an impossible situation. In normal circumstances, arriving at a structure fire with divided forces reduces effectiveness and increases risk to both victims and rescue personnel. Today, it might be Tommy Chin's only chance at survival. Bobby, take Engine 19 around by a sycamore and oak. Marcus orders, his voice carrying the weight of a commander making decisions that could haunt him forever. Sarah, you're with me. We'll keep Ladder 7 here and continue working on clearing this intersection. If we can break through, we'll have the specialized rescue equipment on scene faster than the alternate route. Lieutenant Sarah Chun understands the implications immediately. By splitting their response, they're gambling with both efficiency and safety protocols. Engine 19 carries the water supply and primary suppression equipment, while Ladder 7 has the specialized tools for search and rescue operations, ventilation equipment, and secondary egress capabilities that could mean the difference between successful rescue and recovery of a body. Captain, Sarah responds quietly, if we can't clear this intersection, you and I will arrive at a fully involved structure with ladder truck equipment, but no water supply for suppression. And if Bobby's route gets blocked or delayed, then we improvise. Marcus cuts her off, the desperation in his voice revealing how far outside normal protocols this situation has pushed him. Tommy doesn't have time for perfect tactical decisions. As Engine 19 pulls away with its diesel engine roaring and emergency lights disappearing around the corner, toward the residential back roads. Marcus feels the weight of 15 years of training and experience telling him he's making a catastrophic mistake. Every firefighting manual, every tactical course, every simulation exercise has emphasized the importance of coordinated response with adequate resources. Now he's sending half his crew into potentially deadly conditions with inadequate backup support. Meanwhile, the protest movement begins showing its first significant cracks as individual conscience starts overriding group solidarity. Jennifer Park, the middle-aged mother who earlier began moving away from the barricades, now actively starts cutting zip ties and moving barriers with her car keys and nail file. "I don't care about your political statements," she shouts at David Sterling as he tries to stop her. "I have children, and if my kids were trapped, I'd want every firefighter in the city coming to help them." Her actions inspire others. A young college student named Michael Torres, who joined the protest after his morning environmental economics class, begins unlinking chains and encouraging others to create a passage. "This isn't what we signed up for," he argues with other protesters. "We came here to save the environment, not to let kids die." But the core group of committed activists, led by David Sterling and physically anchored by the protesters chained to concrete barriers, creates an immovable obstacle in the intersection center. Sterling uses a combination of shame, ideology, and group pressure to maintain control over the wavering coalition. "You're being manipulated by classic establishment tactics," he declares through his megaphone, his political science education providing him with frameworks for dismissing emotional appeals. "They use individual tragedy to make us forget systemic oppression." Every social movement in history has faced these same guilt tactics. The civil rights movement didn't stop marching every time someone claimed there was an emergency. Sterling's historical analogies reveal his fundamental misunderstanding of the situation. The civil rights marchers didn't prevent ambulances from reaching heart attack victims or fire trucks from reaching burning schools. They protested against systemic injustice while maintaining basic human decency about emergency situations. Patricia Mills, the veteran activist coordinator, finds herself increasingly isolated as her moral authority erodes. Younger protesters look to her for guidance, but her responses sound increasingly hollow as the human cost of their actions becomes undeniable. "Sometimes the greater good requires difficult sacrifices," she tells a reporter, her words coming across as cold and calculated rather than principled. "Environmental destruction kills thousands of children every year. We can't abandon our responsibility to future generations because of one emotional appeal." The social media firestorm intensifies as live streams and real-time updates reach millions of viewers. #LetThemThrough dominates local trending topics, with thousands of users posting angry messages about protesters blocking emergency responders. Counter hashtags like #ClimateEmergency and #Systemic Thinking gain traction among environmental activists nationwide, but the overwhelming public sentiment favors the firefighters. Marcus receives devastating radio updates as the minutes continue ticking by. Bobby Martinez reports from the alternate route. "Captain, heavy traffic backup on Oak Street. Looks like confused drivers trying to avoid the protest area. Estimate additional 6 to 8 minutes before we reach the scene." Engine 23, already on scene via the eastern approach, provides increasingly dire reports. Interior conditions deteriorating rapidly. Heavy smoke throughout structure. Zero visibility above first floor. Unable to initiate search and rescue without ladder company support for ventilation and secondary egress. The technical details translate into stark reality. Tommy Chun is trapped in conditions that are rapidly becoming unsurvivable, while the equipment and personnel trained to save him remain blocked by people who claim to be fighting for children's futures. Emma Walsh stands at the emotional center of the moral hurricane, feeling the weight of leadership and the consequences of her decisions pressing down like physical force. Her environmental science background makes her acutely aware of fire behavior, smoke toxicity, and the physiological effects of carbon monoxide poisoning. The academic knowledge she's been studying in classroom settings is now playing out in real time with a specific child's life hanging in the balance. Emma, Marcus calls out directly, abandoning any pretense of addressing the group as a whole. You have the power to save this boy's life right now. All you have to do is step aside and let us do our jobs. The personal appeal strips away the political rhetoric and reduces the situation to its essential moral core. A young woman who must choose between ideological consistency and human compassion, between standing with her coalition and saving a child's life. Emma looks at her fellow protesters, some of whom are now openly questioning the leadership's rigid stance. She sees David Sterling glaring at her with the intensity of someone who views any compromise as betrayal. She sees Patricia Mills watching with the calculating gaze of someone weighing political costs and benefits. And she sees Marcus Rivera, a man whose entire career has been dedicated to protecting people like Tommy Chun, whose professional expertise she must either trust or dismiss based on her faith in activist ideology over emergency response experience. The intersection has become a courtroom where humanity itself is on trial, with an 8-year-old boy's life serving as evidence in a case about the fundamental values that should guide human behavior in crisis situations. The first unlikely hero emerges from the crowd of onlookers as Mr. Patterson, the elderly neighbor who has become a grandfather figure to Tommy Chun, pushes through the gathered residents with the determined gait of someone who has lived through enough genuine crises to recognize moral cowardice when he sees it. At 73 years old, Patterson served 2 tours in Vietnam before returning home to work 35 years as a high school math teacher. He's watched Tommy grow up from the toddler who used to chase butterflies in his backyard to the 8-year-old who still visits every Saturday to help with yard work and listen to stories about the old days when Millbrook Heights was a community rather than a collection of property investments. You should be ashamed of yourselves, Patterson declares, his voice carrying the authority of age and moral certainty as he approaches the core group of chain protesters. That little boy comes to my house every weekend. He helps me plant flowers, reads to me when my eyes get tired, and asks about my late wife Martha like she was his own grandmother. And you're going to let him die so you can make a political statement? His words cut through the ideological rhetoric like a knife through tissue paper. Unlike the abstract appeals to general humanitarian principles, Patterson's testimony makes Tommy Chun real, individual, and specific. He's not a statistical victim of fire or a hypothetical child used for emotional manipulation. He's a boy who reads to lonely elderly neighbors and plants flowers in community gardens. Emma Walsh feels something fundamental shift inside her chest as she listens to Patterson's description. Her environmental activism has always been motivated by concern for future generations, for the children who will inherit a damaged planet. But now she's confronted with a present-tense child, a specific boy whose future she has the power to save or destroy in the next few minutes. Tommy's mother works double shifts at the hospital. Patterson continues, his weathered hands gripping the concrete barrier that separates him from the chain protesters. She takes care of COVID patients, saves lives every day, and comes home exhausted to take care of her boy. Lisa Chun has spent the last 2 years grieving her husband while trying to be both mother and father to that child. And now you're going to make her bury her son too. The personal details create cracks in the protest coalition's solidarity. Several activists in the outer rings begin physically distancing themselves from the leadership, creating small gaps in the human chain that Marcus notices immediately. Jennifer Park and Michael Torres, the 2 protesters who earlier began dismantling barriers, now actively work to expand the openings, using car keys and improvised tools to cut zip ties and move obstacles. But David Sterling recognizes the threat that Patterson's emotional appeal poses to the movement's unity. Using his megaphone to address both the protesters and the growing media audience, he attempts to reframe the narrative in ideological rather than personal terms. This is exactly the kind of emotional manipulation that's used to destroy every social movement, Sterling declares, his political science training providing him with historical examples and theoretical frameworks. The establishment always finds individual cases to make us forget systemic oppression. They use the same tactics against civil rights protesters, against Vietnam War demonstrators, against every group that challenged power structures. Sterling's response reveals the fundamental disconnect between academic activism and moral reality. He's treating Tommy Chin's life as a theoretical problem in political science rather than an immediate human emergency. The boy gasping for breath in a smoke-filled room becomes a case study in social movement dynamics rather than a child who needs rescue. Patricia Mills, sensing that her leadership is under pressure from both internal dissent and external criticism, makes a calculated decision to double down on ideological purity rather than compromise with human emotion. Her 4 decades of activism have taught her that movements succeed through discipline and commitment, not through yielding to pressure tactics. Every environmental activist who has ever achieved anything has faced these same guilt tactics, she announces to the assembled protesters, her voice carrying the authority of experience. The fossil fuel industry uses individual tragedies to distract from systematic climate destruction. We cannot abandon our principles every time someone waves a flag of personal emergency. Mill's statement shocks even some of her supporters. The idea that saving a trapped child constitutes abandoning principles or yielding to guilt tactics strikes many protesters as morally bankrupt. Several more activists begin unlinking arms and moving away from the central blockade, their faces showing the internal struggle between loyalty to the cause and basic human decency. Marcus watches these developments with growing hope mixed with desperate urgency. Every defection from the protest creates potential openings for Ladder 7 to navigate through the intersection, but the core group of chain protesters still maintains an impenetrable barrier across the main traffic lanes. The arrival of Tommy's neighbors escalates the emotional pressure exponentially. Mrs. Rodriguez, the babysitter who escaped the fire but couldn't reach Tommy, arrives on scene with soot-stained clothes and tears streaming down her face. Her presence transforms the situation from abstract debate about emergency protocols to immediate confrontation with the human cost of delay. "Please," she begs, approaching Emma Walsh directly with her hands clasped in supplication. "I promised his mother I would keep him safe. I tried to get to his room, but the smoke was too thick. Please let them through. Please help us save Tommy." Rodriguez's desperate plea creates a moment of absolute moral clarity. Emma Walsh, looking into the eyes of a woman who feels responsible for Tommy's safety, must choose between maintaining solidarity with her fellow activists and allowing emergency responders to attempt a rescue that might already be too late. The fracturing of the protest movement accelerates as more participants recognize the impossible position their leadership has created. What began as environmental activism has devolved into a situation where young idealists find themselves preventing the rescue of a child. The cognitive dissonance becomes unbearable for activists who join the movement to protect future generations. Marcus receives another devastating radio update that strips away any remaining hope for a routine rescue. "Captain, conditions inside the structure have deteriorated beyond safe interior operations. We need ladder company support immediately for emergency ventilation and alternative access routes." Without immediate intervention, this becomes a recovery operation rather than a rescue. The technical language translates into stark reality. Tommy Chun is running out of time, and the window for successful rescue is rapidly closing. Marcus realizes that even if the protesters step aside immediately, the delay has already pushed this emergency beyond the margins of normal firefighting operations into the realm of desperate, high-risk intervention. Emma Walsh stands at the center of a moral hurricane, feeling the weight of leadership and the consequences of her decisions crushing down upon her like physical force. The environmental science courses that motivated her activism have taught her about systems thinking, long-term consequences, and the interconnected nature of environmental and social justice. But nothing in her education prepared her for this moment when abstract principles collide with immediate human need. The moment of truth arrives with the sound of splintering wood and snapping metal as frustrated residents begin taking direct action against the protest barriers. Richard Blackwood, despite his earlier callous comments about the Chin family, finds his corporate executive instincts for crisis management overriding his personal prejudices as the situation threatens to spiral completely out of control. "This has gone far enough," Blackwood declares, producing a crowbar from his Tesla's emergency kit and beginning to pry apart the wooden barriers that protesters have constructed across the intersection. His action galvanizes other residents who have been watching the standoff with growing frustration and horror. Within minutes, a chaotic scene unfolds as residents clash with protesters in what threatens to become the first violent confrontation of the day. Diane Blackwood, initially shocked by her husband's sudden shift from calculated indifference to direct action, finds herself caught between her community leadership role and the undeniable moral urgency of the situation. "Richard, we can't just destroy private property," she calls out, though her voice lacks conviction as she watches her husband methodically dismantling protest infrastructure. "There are legal procedures for this kind of situation." "Legal procedures won't save that boy's life," Richard responds, his corporate efficiency applied to physical labor as he reduces carefully constructed barriers to scatter debris. "I may have my issues with the Chun family's property maintenance, but I'm not going to watch a child die because of political theater." The confrontation escalates when David Sterling and several hardcore activists attempt to physically prevent the residents from clearing the barricades. Sterling positions himself directly in front of Blackwood's crowbar, creating a standoff within a larger standoff as cameras capture the dramatic confrontation between corporate executive and environmental activist. "You have no right to suppress our First Amendment protests," Sterling shouts, his megaphone crackling with feedback as he positions himself inches from Blackwood's face. This is exactly the kind of fascist intimidation that environmental movements face every day. Blackwood's response reveals the fundamental difference between academic activism and practical emergency management. "Son, I don't care about your constitutional rights when there's a child suffocating in smoke. Move out of my way, or I'll move you myself." The threatened violence creates a moment of crystalline clarity for Emma Walsh as she watches the situation deteriorate beyond any possibility of political victory. Her environmental activism, which began with genuine concern for planetary survival, has devolved into a physical confrontation that serves no constructive purpose while actively preventing the rescue of a trapped child. Marcus realizes that the escalating conflict between residents and protesters could destroy any chance of creating a clear passage for emergency vehicles. Physical violence will bring police intervention, media chaos, and potential injuries that will further complicate an already impossible situation. "Everyone stop!" Marcus shouts, his firefighter's voice trained to cut through emergency chaos and noise. "This isn't helping Tommy, and it's not helping anyone else. We need organized action, not mob violence." His intervention creates a momentary pause in the confrontation, but the underlying tensions remain explosive. Residents and protesters face off across hastily constructed barricades, while Marcus finds himself in the impossible position of trying to maintain peace between warring factions while still attempting to reach a dying child. Emma Walsh experiences her moment of moral truth as she watches the chaos unfold around her. The environmental coalition she spent weeks building has collapsed in a factional fighting that serves no positive purpose. The climate emergency that motivated her activism has been overshadowed by an immediate human emergency that she has the power to address. "David, we have to stop this," she calls out to Sterling, her voice barely audible over the shouting crowd. "This isn't what we came here to do. We're supposed to be protecting future generations, not letting children die in the present." Sterling's response reveals the ideological rigidity that has trapped the protest movement in an untenable position. "Emma, if we give in now, we surrender every principle we've fought for." Environmental activists can't start making exceptions every time the establishment waves an emergency flag. This is exactly how they break down every social movement in history. His academic framework has become a prison that prevents him from recognizing the difference between strategic compromise and complete capitulation. The protest's original goals, stopping environmentally destructive development, have been completely overshadowed by the immediate need to save Tommy Chen's life. Emma realizes that she must choose between loyalty to her fellow activists and loyalty to her deeper principles about protecting life. Her environmental science education has taught her that effective activism requires both strategic thinking and moral flexibility, the ability to adapt tactics while maintaining core values. "I'm sorry, David," she says quietly, producing her own key ring and beginning to cut the zip ties that secure her section of the human chain. "I can't be responsible for a child's death. This isn't environmental activism anymore. It's just cruelty." Her defection from the core leadership group creates a cascade effect as other protesters follow her example. Jennifer Park and Michael Torres, who earlier began dismantling barriers, now work openly to create emergency vehicle access corridors. The human chain begins dissolving as individual conscience overrides group solidarity. But the protesters who are physically chained to concrete barriers cannot simply walk away from their positions. Patricia Mills and a handful of the most committed activists remain locked in place, creating an immovable obstacle in the intersection's center even as the broader coalition collapses around them. "You're making a terrible mistake," Mills calls out to the defecting protesters, her voice carrying 4 decades of activist experience and ideological certainty. "Environmental destruction kills thousands of children every year. We can't abandon our responsibility to future generations because of one emotional appeal." Her words ring hollow as emergency radio updates provide increasingly desperate reports from the fire scene. Bobby Martinez, finally reaching 1247 Elm Street via the circuitous alternate route, radios back with devastating news. "Captain, Engine 23 reports flashover conditions developing on the second floor. Interior search operations suspended due to extreme heat and structural collapse potential." The technical terminology translates into stark reality. Tommy Chin's room is becoming an inferno, and the window for successful rescue has nearly closed. Even if Ladder 7 reaches the scene immediately, they will be attempting a recovery operation rather than a life-saving rescue. Marcus faces the most difficult decision of his 15-year career as he realizes that traditional firefighting protocols may no longer be sufficient. The delay caused by the protest has pushed this emergency beyond the boundaries of routine rescue operations into the realm of desperate, high-risk intervention that could cost both his crew's safety and Tommy's life. Emma Walsh, now actively working to dismantle the barriers she helped create, feels the crushing weight of responsibility as she realizes that her moment of moral clarity may have arrived too late to save the child she originally intended to protect. When Ladder 7 finally roars through the hastily cleared passage in the intersection, Marcus feels no sense of victory or vindication. The digital clock on the dashboard reads 3:12 p.m., 25 minutes since the initial alarm. What should have been a routine 4-minute response has become a desperate race against time, where every second delay has exponentially increased the danger to Tommy Chun. As they approach 1247 Elm Street, the scene that greets them represents every firefighter's nightmare scenario. The modest 2-story colonial home is fully involved, with flames visible through second-floor windows and thick black smoke billowing from the roof. Engine 23 and other units that arrive via alternate routes have established a defensive perimeter, but the delay has transformed what might have been a manageable rescue into a life-threatening operation requiring extraordinary measures. Captain Williams from Engine 23 provides a grim briefing over the radio. Interior conditions have deteriorated beyond safe operational parameters. "We've got flashover conditions developing on the second floor, structural integrity compromised, and zero visibility throughout the upper level. Last confirmed location of the victim was the northeast bedroom, but we haven't been able to establish interior access due to extreme heat and smoke conditions." Marcus surveys the scene with 15 years of experience reading fire behavior and structural dynamics. The flames consuming the second floor have created temperatures exceeding 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit. The wooden floor joists are likely weakened to the point of imminent collapse. Standard rescue protocols would declare this a recovery operation rather than an active rescue. but Marcus knows that declaring Tommy Chun dead might be premature. Sarah, get the thermal imaging camera and prepare for emergency ventilation. Marcus orders, his voice carrying the authority of someone making decisions that exist outside normal departmental guidelines. Jake, establish secondary water supply and prepare for defensive operations if we need emergency egress. Lieutenant Sarah Chun understands immediately that Marcus is planning to attempt an interior rescue under conditions that violate every safety protocol they've been trained to follow. The delay caused by the protest has created a situation where saving Tommy Chun requires risking the lives of the rescuers, a calculation that weighs heavily on every firefighter's conscience. Captain, Sarah responds quietly over their personal radio channel. Thermal imaging shows extreme heat signatures throughout the second floor. Interior access risks floor collapse and flashover exposure. We could lose the whole rescue team. Marcus faces the defining decision of his career. Standard operating procedures exist to protect firefighters from exactly these situations. Scenarios where emotional urgency tempts rescue personnel to take risks that are statistically likely to result in multiple casualties rather than successful saves. But Tommy Chin's situation isn't standard, and the 21-minute delay has pushed this operation beyond the boundaries of normal risk assessment. I'm going in, Marcus announces, checking his self-contained breathing apparatus and thermal protection gear. If that floor collapses, it'll happen whether we're on it or not. Tommy's only chance is if someone reaches him before the structural failure becomes complete. The decision violates departmental policy, insurance protocols, and basic firefighter safety training. Marcus is risking not only his own life, but potentially creating a situation where additional firefighters must risk their lives to rescue him if the operation goes wrong. It's the kind of decision that ends careers and generates investigations. But it's also the kind of decision that defines the difference between following procedures and saving lives. As Marcus enters the smoke-filled structure, his thermal imaging camera reveals the hellish conditions inside Tommy's home. The first floor, while damaged by smoke and heat, remains structurally sound. But the stairway to the second floor shows ominous signs of thermal stress, with wooden components glowing white-hot on the camera's display. Every step up the stairs feels like walking into a furnace. The temperature inside Marcus's protective gear climbs rapidly despite the advanced cooling systems. His breathing apparatus provides clean air, but the radiant heat penetrates his equipment and begins affecting his cognitive function. Tunnel vision, reduced reaction time, and impaired judgment are all symptoms of heat stress that could prove fatal in this environment. The hallway leading to Tommy's bedroom exists in a state of barely controlled chaos. Flames dance along the ceiling, creating a rolling wave of superheated gases that could trigger flashover at any moment. Flashover, the point when all combustible materials in an enclosed space simultaneously ignite, would instantly raise the temperature to over 1,800 degrees Fahrenheit and kill anyone inside within seconds. Marcus reaches Tommy's bedroom door and finds it partially open, smoke pouring out in a dense black stream that indicates extremely poor conditions inside. The thermal imaging camera shows a small heat signature in the far corner of the room, either Tommy Chun or the last remnants of furniture that haven't yet been consumed by the fire. Tommy, Marcus shouts through his breathing apparatus, though his voice is muffled by equipment and competing with the roar of flames consuming the building around him. Tommy, can you hear me? No response. The heat signature on the thermal camera remains motionless, indicating either unconsciousness or worse. Marcus realizes he has perhaps 30 seconds to reach Tommy and extract him before the floor structure fails or flashover conditions make the room unsurvivable even with full protective equipment. As he enters the bedroom, Marcus feels the floor shifting beneath his feet. The wooden joists, weakened by prolonged exposure to extreme heat, are beginning the structural failure that will collapse the entire second floor. His movement across the compromised flooring could trigger the collapse immediately, trapping both him and Tommy in the burning debris. Tommy Chun lies unconscious in the corner of his bedroom, his small body partially protected by an overturned desk that has shielded him from falling debris. Marcus's medical training allows him to quickly assess the boy's condition. Unconscious but breathing, likely overcome by smoke inhalation, but potentially still viable if they can reach medical care immediately. The extraction requires Marcus to cross 15 feet of compromised flooring while carrying an unconscious child, navigate back through the superheated hallway, and descend stairs that may collapse under their combined weight. Every element of the rescue violates safety protocols and risks creating a double fatality instead of a successful save. But as Marcus lifts Tommy's unconscious form and feels the boy's shallow breathing, he realizes that this choice between following procedures and risking everything to save a child, represents the fundamental reason he became a firefighter 15 years ago. Some decisions transcend policy and protocol, revealing the human heart beneath the professional uniform. The journey back to safety begins with a prayer and a promise that neither Marcus nor Tommy Chun will be casualties of the protesters' delay. The race to St. Mary's Hospital occurs in a blur of sirens, flashing lights, and desperate medical intervention as paramedics work to stabilize Tommy Chin's critical condition. His small body, limp and unresponsive in the ambulance, shows the devastating effects of prolonged smoke inhalation that could have been prevented with a normal 4-minute response time instead of the 25 minutes it actually took to reach him. Dr. Sarah Martinez, the pediatric emergency physician who receives Tommy at the hospital, immediately recognizes the severity of his condition. Severe smoke inhalation with carbon monoxide poisoning, she announces to her team as they transfer him to the trauma bay. Blood oxygen saturation at 68%, signs of pulmonary edema, possible neurological damage from prolonged hypoxia. The medical terminology translates into stark reality. Tommy's lungs have been damaged by toxic smoke, his blood cannot carry sufficient oxygen to his organs, and the delay in rescue may have caused permanent brain damage. What should have been a treatable case of smoke inhalation has become a fight for the boy's life and long-term neurological function. Lisa Chun receives the call while finishing her shift in the COVID recovery ward, her hands still trembling from treating her own patients when the hospital social worker delivers the news that every parent fears most. The drive from her unit to the pediatric intensive care unit feels like traveling through a nightmare where familiar hospital corridors become an obstacle course between her and her dying child. When she arrives at Tommy's bedside, the sight of her 8-year-old son connected to life support equipment triggers a breakdown that nurses and social workers recognize as the reaction of a parent confronting their worst fears. The machines breathing for Tommy, monitoring his heart rate, and filtering toxins from his blood represent technology that could have been unnecessary with a faster emergency response. Will he be okay? Lisa asks Dr. Martinez, though her medical training as a registered nurse provides her with enough knowledge to understand the gravity of the equipment surrounding her son's bed. Will there be permanent damage? Dr. Martinez's response carries the careful precision of a physician discussing uncertain outcomes. The next 72 hours are critical. The carbon monoxide exposure was severe, and we're seeing signs of cerebral edema, swelling in the brain tissue. We've initiated hyperbaric oxygen therapy to accelerate carbon monoxide elimination, but the delay in treatment has complicated his prognosis. The community's reaction to Tommy's condition reveals the true character of Millbrook Heights residents as they confront the consequences of the morning's events. Some neighbors rally around the Chun family with genuine concern and support, organizing meal deliveries, offering childcare assistance, and creating a support network that transcends the earlier divisions. But other residents, led by Richard and Diane Blackwood, begin a calculated campaign to manage the public relations fallout and minimize their community's responsibility for the delayed response. Within hours of Tommy's hospitalization, the Community Standards Committee releases a carefully worded statement that manages to express concern for the boy while deflecting blame onto external factors. While our hearts go out to the Chun family during this difficult time, the statement reads, "We must recognize that this tragic situation resulted from the irresponsible actions of outside agitators who chose our community as a venue for their political demonstration. The Millbrook Heights Community Standards Committee has repeatedly advocated for enhanced emergency service protocols that would have prevented exactly this type of disruption. The statement's calculated language reveals the Blackwood's primary concern with protecting property values and community reputation rather than acknowledging their role in exacerbating the crisis. Diane Blackwood takes the lead in this damage control effort, leveraging her social connections and committee leadership to shape the narrative around the incident. "We need to frame this properly," she explains to other committee members during an emergency meeting held while Tommy fights for his life. "The protest was an external threat to our community safety. Our residents acted heroically to clear the obstruction when authorities failed to respond adequately. We're victims of activist extremism, not contributors to this tragedy." The investigation into the incident begins immediately, with multiple agencies launching parallel inquiries into the delayed emergency response. The fire department's Internal Affairs Division reviews Marcus's decision to split his crew and attempt a rescue under dangerous conditions. The city attorney's office examines potential liability issues arising from the protest blockade and the community's response to it. Marcus finds himself summoned to a preliminary interview with department investigators who treat his heroic rescue of Tommy Chun as a potential policy violation requiring administrative review. The bureaucratic response treats the man who risked his life to save a child as a problem to be managed rather than a hero to be celebrated. Captain Rivera, Internal Affairs Investigator Thompson states, consulting his clipboard with bureaucratic precision, department policy clearly prohibits interior rescue operations under flashover conditions without adequate backup support and incident command approval. Your decision to enter that structure violated multiple safety protocols and created unnecessary risk exposure for department personnel. The investigation's focus on policy compliance rather than life-saving results reveals how institutional thinking prioritizes procedural adherence over mission accomplishment. Marcus's successful rescue of Tommy Chun becomes evidence of reckless decision-making rather than professional heroism. Meanwhile, the protest movement faces its own reckoning as the environmental coalition fractures completely under the weight of public criticism and internal guilt. Emma Walsh, devastated by her role in delaying Tommy's rescue, withdraws from activist leadership and begins questioning every assumption underlying her approach to social change. David Sterling and Patricia Mills, the two activists who maintained the blockade until the end, face potential criminal charges for interfering with emergency services. Their legal defense strategy involves portraying the incident as a conflict between constitutional rights and public safety, but the optics of activists preventing child rescue create an almost impossible public relations battle. The social media firestorm that began during the protest intensifies as news of Tommy's critical condition spreads nationwide. Hashtag TommyChin begins trending as millions of users debate the balance between protest rights and emergency access, with most comments expressing outrage at activists who would block firefighters from reaching a trapped child. Local news coverage focuses heavily on the human drama of Tommy's fight for life, while national media outlets use the incident to advance broader narratives about activism, emergency services, and community responsibility. The complex reality of competing interests and difficult decisions gets reduced to simple talking points that serve political rather than educational purposes. As Tommy enters his second day in the pediatric intensive care unit, the machines breathing for him and monitoring his brain function serve as mechanical reminders of the human cost of the morning's delay. His condition remains critical but stable, with doctors cautiously optimistic about his physical recovery, while remaining concerned about potential long-term neurological effects from the prolonged oxygen deprivation. The official investigation into the Millbrook Heights incident begins 3 days after Tommy Chen's rescue, with a multi-agency task force examining every aspect of the delayed emergency response. Fire Chief Robert Sullivan chairs the primary review panel, flanked by representatives from the mayor's office, city attorney's office, and the state emergency management agency. Their mission involves determining responsibility, assessing liability, and implementing reforms to prevent similar situations in the future. Marcus finds himself in the uncomfortable position of being both a witness to bureaucratic failure and a subject of administrative scrutiny. The conference room at City Hall feels more like a courtroom as investigators question his decision-making process during the crisis, treating his successful rescue of Tommy Chun as evidence of policy violations rather than professional heroism. Captain Rivera, Chief Sullivan begins, consulting a thick folder of incident reports and witness statements. Your decision to split your crew and attempt interior rescue under extreme conditions violated multiple departmental safety protocols. How do you justify risking additional lives in what had already become a compromised situation? The question reveals the fundamental disconnect between administrative thinking and emergency reality. Marcus has spent 15 years making split-second decisions under life-threatening conditions, while the investigators questioning him have never faced the moral weight of choosing between policy compliance and saving a child's life. Chief, with respect, Marcus responds, maintaining professional composure despite his frustration. Those safety protocols assume normal response conditions. When protesters block emergency access for 25 minutes, normal protocols become inadequate. Tommy Chun would have died if we had followed standard operating procedures. City Attorney Jennifer Walsh, no relation to the activist Emma Walsh, interjects with a legal perspective that will ultimately determine the city's financial liability. Captain, the issue isn't whether your actions saved the child's life. The issue is whether the fire department created additional liability exposure by deviating from established safety guidelines. If one of your crew members had been injured or killed during that rescue, the city would face wrongful death lawsuits that could bankrupt our emergency services budget. The legal framework reduces Tommy's rescue to a cost-benefit analysis where saving a child's life must be weighed against potential financial exposure. Marcus realizes that the bureaucratic system views his heroism as a liability problem rather than a moral imperative, a perspective that fundamentally misunderstands the purpose of emergency services. Meanwhile, the criminal investigation into the protest organizers proceeds through the district attorney's office, where prosecutor Michael Chun, coincidentally sharing Tommy's surname, faces the politically sensitive task of determining appropriate charges against environmental activists whose demonstration nearly resulted in a child's death. David Sterling and Patricia Mills, the two protest leaders who maintained the blockade until the end, face potential felony charges for interfering with emergency services and reckless endangerment. Their legal defense team, provided by the Environmental Defense Fund, argues that the charges represent an unconstitutional attack on First Amendment rights and peaceful protest. My clients were exercising their constitutional right to peaceful assembly, defense attorney Rachel Martinez explains to reporters outside the courthouse. The government cannot criminalize environmental activism by claiming that every demonstration potentially interferes with emergency services. This prosecution sets a dangerous precedent that could effectively end all meaningful protest in America. Emma Walsh, who ultimately helped clear the roadway, faces lesser charges but greater personal torment as she grapples with her role in nearly causing Tommy's death. Her environmental science background makes her acutely aware of the physiological effects of smoke inhalation and carbon monoxide poisoning, transforming her from passionate activist into reluctant expert witness about the medical consequences of the delayed response. The legal proceedings reveal the complex web of responsibility surrounding the incident. The protest organizers argue they couldn't have foreseen the emergency, while the city claims inadequate police resources prevented timely intervention. The fire department defends Marcus's actions while simultaneously investigating him for policy violations, creating internal contradictions that undermine their credibility. Public opinion polls conducted by local media outlets show the community remains sharply divided about responsibility and consequences. 67% of respondents support Marcus and his crew, viewing them as heroes who saved Tommy despite impossible circumstances. However, 31% believe the firefighters should have followed proper procedures regardless of the emergency's urgency, while 2% remain undecided. The Blackwoods and their Community Standards Committee launch a sophisticated public relations campaign designed to shape the investigation's outcome and protect their neighborhood's reputation. They hire Meridian Communications, a crisis management firm specializing in municipal liability cases, to craft messaging that positions Millbrook Heights as victims of activist extremism rather than contributors to the delayed response. Our community has always supported our emergency services. Richard Blackwood testifies before the review panel, his corporate executive training evident in his polished presentation. The tragic delay in reaching young Tommy resulted from outside agitators who invaded our neighborhood to advance their political agenda. We're calling for enhanced emergency response protocols that will prevent future activist interference with public safety operations. Diane Blackwood supplements her husband's testimony with detailed documentation of the Community Standards Committee's previous interactions with fire department leadership, carefully edited to emphasize their support for emergency services while minimizing references to their complaints about sirens, response procedures, and station location. The investigation's scope expands as federal authorities examine potential civil rights violations and domestic terrorism charges related to the protests' interference with emergency services. FBI Special Agent Maria Rodriguez interviews witnesses and reviews social media communications to determine whether the environmental activists' actions constitute criminal conspiracy or merely poor judgment. The question we're examining, Agent Rodriguez explains to congressional staffers monitoring the case, is whether there was deliberate intent to interfere with emergency services or whether this was an unintended consequence of otherwise legal protest activity. The distinction determines whether we're dealing with domestic terrorism or civil disobedience that went tragically wrong. Marcus receives notification that his actions during the rescue will be reviewed by a departmental disciplinary board that could result in sanctions ranging from written reprimand to termination. The irony of facing professional punishment for saving Tommy's life represents everything wrong with bureaucratic systems that prioritize procedure over purpose. Lieutenant Sarah Chun and rookie Jake Thompson also face administrative review for their participation in the unauthorized rescue operation, though their sanctions will likely be less severe given Marcus's leadership role in the decision-making process. The entire crew finds themselves treated as problems to be managed rather than heroes to be celebrated. The legal and administrative machinery grinding through the Millbrook Heights incident reveals how institutional systems often fail to account for the human realities that emergency responders face daily. Tommy Chen's life was saved not because of policies and procedures, but despite them, by professionals willing to risk their careers and lives to protect a child. 6 months after the incident that changed everything, Tommy Chun runs across the playground at Millbrook Elementary School with the boundless energy of a healthy 9-year-old, his laughter carrying across the autumn air like a testament to the power of human courage and professional dedication. The respiratory sensitivity that doctors warned might plague him for life has proven manageable with medication, and the cognitive function tests that terrified his mother in those first dark weeks have shown no signs of permanent damage. Dr. Martinez delivers the news that Lisa Chun has been praying to hear since that terrible April afternoon. Tommy's latest pulmonary function tests show continued improvement. The lung scarring is minimal, and his oxygen saturation levels are consistently normal. He'll need to avoid heavy smoke exposure and may experience some sensitivity during respiratory illness, but he can expect to live a completely normal life. The medical victory represents more than just Tommy's recovery. It validates every risk that Marcus and his crew took during that desperate rescue operation. The boy's survival and health serve as living proof that heroism sometimes requires breaking rules, that saving lives matters more than following procedures, and that the human heart must sometimes override institutional thinking. The broader community transformation has been equally remarkable. The Millbrook Heights that emerges from the crisis bears little resemblance to the entitled enclave that once treated emergency services as hired, helped to be managed and controlled. The Community Standards Committee has been disbanded, its members either voted out of their positions or voluntarily stepping down in the face of community pressure. Richard Blackwood, whose callous comments about Tommy's family were recorded and widely circulated, has faced both professional and social consequences that extend far beyond the neighborhood. Synapse Technologies lost several major contracts after clients learned about their CEO's response to a child emergency, and the family has quietly put their Millbrook Heights mansion on the market, planning to relocate to a community where their reputation might recover. Diane Blackwood's fall from social prominence has been equally dramatic. Her carefully cultivated network of influential friends has largely abandoned her after the incident exposed her willingness to prioritize property values over human life. The charity organizations that once competed for her leadership now politely decline her involvement, leaving her isolated within the very community she once dominated. The new community leadership, elected in a special vote that drew unprecedented turnout, reflects values fundamentally different from the previous power structure. Sarah Patterson, the retired nurse who lives 3 doors down from Tommy's family, was elected as the new Neighborhood Association president on a platform of supporting rather than restricting emergency services. Our first priority is ensuring that what happened to Tommy never happens to another child in our community, Patterson announces at her inaugural meeting, held in the community center rather than the exclusive clubhouse favored by previous leadership. We're going to work with our fire department and police to improve emergency response, not create obstacles to it. The policy changes that emerge from the incident create a model for emergency services coordination that other communities begin adopting. The new protocols establish protected emergency corridors during any large public gathering, mandate community cooperation with emergency responders, and create legal penalties for interference with rescue operations. Marcus receives official recognition that validates his heroic actions while acknowledging the complex circumstances that required extraordinary measures. The state governor presents him with a Medal of Valor at a ceremony attended by Tommy Chun and his mother, transforming the bureaucratic nightmare of the investigation into a celebration of professional courage and dedication. Captain Rivera and his crew faced an impossible situation created by the failure of multiple systems, Governor Patricia Williams states during the presentation ceremony. Their willingness to risk their lives and careers to save a child represents the highest ideals of public service and human compassion. The fire department's internal investigation ultimately clears Marcus of policy violations, recognizing that the unprecedented circumstances required decisions that existed outside normal operational parameters. The final report becomes a case study in crisis leadership and moral courage that fire academies across the country incorporate into their training programs. Emma Walsh undergoes the most profound personal transformation of anyone involved in the incident. Her environmental activism continues, but with a fundamentally different approach that prioritizes practical effectiveness over ideological purity. She develops protest strategies that maintain emergency access corridors and works with local authorities to ensure that environmental demonstrations enhance rather than compromise public safety. I learned that you can't save the planet by sacrificing the people living on it, she explains to a college environmental science class where she now teaches about responsible activism. Real environmental leadership means considering all the consequences of our actions, including the immediate human costs of our political strategies. David Sterling and Patricia Mills, the 2 activists who maintained the blockade until the end, faced different fates that reflect their different responses to the moral reckoning. Sterling's conviction for interfering with emergency services results in community service hours working with local fire departments, where he gains appreciation for the complexity and importance of emergency response operations. Mills, however, refuses to acknowledge any responsibility for the near tragedy, instead doubling down on her position that emergency services represent tools of systematic oppression. Her inflexibility ultimately isolates her from the environmental movement as other activists recognize the need for more pragmatic approaches to social change. The legal settlements that emerge from the incident establish important precedents for balancing First Amendment rights with public safety requirements. Protest organizers gain clear guidelines for maintaining emergency access while preserving their ability to engage in meaningful civil disobedience, creating a framework that protects both constitutional rights and public welfare. Tommy's recovery culminates in a community celebration that transforms the anniversary of the near tragedy into an occasion for honoring the emergency services personnel who risk their lives to protect others. The annual Heroes Day Festival, held each April in the park near the Chun family home, brings together residents and first responders in a spirit of mutual respect and appreciation. As Marcus watches Tommy demonstrate proper fire safety techniques to younger children during the festival, he reflects on the lesson that the incident taught everyone involved, that heroism isn't about following rules or breaking them, but about having the moral courage to do what's right when human life hangs in the balance. The story that began with protesters blocking firefighters from reaching a trapped child ends with a community that understands the true value of the people who stand ready to risk everything to protect others. Tommy Chin's laughter on the playground serves as the ultimate validation of every risk taken and every rule broken in service of preserving human life and dignity.